Hello, my name is Mansoor Orm, and I'm going to be telling you how to judge a public forum debate. So, the first thing we want to look at when judging a debate is to understand the debate itself. Now, you're looking for ideas of clash, and these ideas must be communicated in a manner that is persuasive to the judge and to any audience members that there may be. The debate should consist of solid logic, lucid reasoning, and a lot of analysis into these into these theories that will be debated. And debaters must utilize some evidence in this debate to support their theories or their points, and to support their logic. We just can't have this exterior logic that is just way out of this world, and because they buy it, then it works. That's not the whole idea. There must be some sort of evidence that drives this piece of logic that they're trying to use. And they will offer some form of clash of ideas by refuting their opponent's points. And that's normally brought up in the second speech, the rebuttal speech. And that's where they're going to see these pieces of evidence used in that manner. So as a judge, you're really going to pay attention to those items, and you're going to want to write any of those key points down on your flow, and you might want to jot down a note about what piece of evidence they may have used, because you as a judge might want to call that evidence into question, or if that evidence backs a loosely based point, or a point that's not really based in any common logic that you could buy, then you may want to see that evidence, or that evidence might be hotly debated in the debate. So it might help to write down like the source. If it's maybe the New York Times and that's one of their New York Times pieces, you write down the point and then what they're saying and then their source. So if their point is on nuclear weapons being used by North Korea, then you're going to want to write down like nuclear weapons, NK for North Korea, and then maybe New York Times with that. So that way you know that that was said and what source was used, and then when other opponents will bring that up, then you know as well what to expect, what they're going to say with that source. And you may want to ask for that later because that could be something hotly debated. So that's one of the things you're going to want to look at. Now, one of the things as a judge you want to pay attention to is the speaking order. And I know it may sound silly, but sometimes judges will forget that, and that's one thing that you should really pay attention to, because you may have the con side speaking first, or which case the pro would be speaking second. And also as a judge, this is again while the round is happening, and even prior to the round, you're going to want to pay attention to the resolution, whether the debaters are saying it, but you as a judge should have at least a knowledge of what the resolution actually is. Maybe actually bring that piece with you into the round. Because at the end, we're really looking at who best incorporates what the resolution is asking. And if the pro side does what the resolution is asking, and the con side has an inability to rebuttal against it or to present points against that resolution, then you would see that in dictating who has won the round. But it really helps to have that, because then you can understand whether a point is non-resolutional or it is resolutional. Because sometimes debaters will say, well, that point is non-resolutional, so I'm going to drop it. But if you as the judge have the resolution and you see that, yeah, that point actually is resolutional, like I have the resolution right here, then you could make that decision as well. But then you want to go into the round. And understanding the round is very important. You're going to have to really understand the first two speeches, and that's really where you're going to want to judge, at least with speaker points, on how clear those are, how well they're spoken to you, how well the point comes across, maybe even vocal variety. And that's going to help you incorporate at least your speaker points, because when giving a high speaker point, you're going to really want to say that that team spoke very well, they did very good, and how they got their point across. And a lot of that comes down to the first speech as well, because that's really where points are said, and if someone's jumbling their words, you may miss a point as a judge, and that really isn't your fault. But if that point comes up later in the round, and you as a judge know that something was missed, And that's something you may want to bring up after the round and say, you guys missed a point, and when another team responds saying, we actually said that in our first contention, then you say, well, you should have done a better job speaking it because you jumbled your words. But then you want to pay attention to as well the crossfires, the summary, and the grand crossfire and the final focus. Now, crossfire, you don't really have to flow these. These aren't really required of a judge, but it's very well good to pay attention to them because something might be said that may be important to you or may be a game changer for you in the round. So that's one thing to focus on. And then the summaries are really where you're going to want to see points be brought across, and the team should be doing the job for you of telling you which points you should be voting on and telling you which points that you as the judge should be voting on, what's happened with those points, and why those are the major voting issues. And then you move again to the grand crossfire where you just do it as any other grand crossfire. And then moving to the final focus. As a judge, you should know that no new arguments are to be brought up or accepted in the final focus. So you don't want a team coming in with the second speech in the final focus and rattling off a bunch of new points, because that's really unfair to the team that spoke first. So that's one thing you just absolutely must know. But the final focus is really a point where they should be telling you why they're winning those points that they said in the summary. And that's really where you're going to see the pinnacle of the round happen. And then when evaluating the entire debate, there are many key points that you're going to want to look at. One is the quality of the arguments made. You as the judge should not bring in any of your own personal beliefs and not issues that you think that they should have covered or covered completely or stuff you would have wanted to see covered more. That shouldn't be at all brought up in how you judge this round, because it's really just the quality of the arguments, how well they were refuted, the rebuttals made, and such. No judging beliefs should be brought into this round that are personal to you or stuff you said you thought that as a judge they should have brought up more or covered more, because at the end of the day, it isn't what you believe should have been covered more. The team may have done a good job with what they've already had, but just because you thought something should have been covered more, then they can't really reflect your own beliefs. Then you should really take that out of your consideration. And you're going to want to look at how these points were brought up, if there was logical reasoning in them, that both sides were mature in the debate, and how effective they were in communicating those points. Because, as again I brought up earlier, if they're jumbling their words and they can't get them across, then that may play a part. Because if you miss a point because they're jumbling their words or they can't talk straight or they don't have their thoughts together, then as a judge it's not your fault, and that's one thing you want to take into consideration. Because if they can't communicate effectively, which is one of the biggest parts of this debate, then that's again one of the things that they are at fault for, and that's something you should look at in this debate. And again, at the end of the round, you're going to want to evaluate the evidence. As we brought up earlier with the North Korean nuclear weapon evidence from the New York Times, you as the judge may say, well, that's very questionable. And again, that we're looking at logical reasoning. So you say, well, I'd like to see that New York Times evidence. Now, if the evidence is holding up and it's from the New York Times and it's logical in what it's saying, then you as a judge can't discount it because you don't believe it. Again, we're not bringing up our own personal beliefs. We're just looking up if it's logical, if the evidence is in fact true, and then using that in the decision. Now, the other side in that debate may just destroy that evidence, so in which case you may not need it anymore. But again, you can't really bring up your own personal belief on something like that if the argument is well thought out, it's well spoken, and they effectively get that point across, and it's unrefuted. And so it's the team's job to convey the judge and convince the judge that their side should be adopted or won. And the pro side has the burden of proving the resolution. The con side has to reject this resolution. So that's one thing really you have to pay attention for at the end of the round. Have those really been followed? Has one team conceded to the other? If one team conceded to the other in a crossfire and that was brought up again, then you want to look at that, because if they had forfeited the debate early on, then that team may have lost the debate. Whether or not they continued, they forfeited. And you're going to want to weigh arguments. Now, normally, this is the job in part of the judge and of the students. The students are going to want to tell you how to weigh the arguments most of the time, if they're advanced debaters. But if they're not, then this leaves you, the judge, with the burden of weighing the arguments. So you're going to want to weigh the arguments clearly, and you want to make sure that they were clearly explained and that you don't discount arguments. But you might want to discount arguments that are too jarbled or full of way technical terminology that even the debaters themselves aren't able to fully explain. Because at that point, if they can't explain their own terminology, then there is some fault in there. But speakers should appeal to a good audience through with their sound reasoning. They want to have organization in their speaking and credible evidence and very, very clear delivery. Pay attention for them stating contention 1's, contention 2's, contention 3, or I'm winning for 3 reasons, and then reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. Those are really what you want to pay attention for in evaluating speaker points, and noticing those things and proving that they have won the round because of what they've said. And just some absolute no's in any debate. If there's any dishonesty whatsoever, whether it be misusing research or falsifying research, and that in that case, or just saying a source when they don't actually have it. So that New York Times source with North Korea launching a nuclear weapon, if they just said New York Times, but then when asked for the evidence, they don't have the evidence, that's one thing to consider, because that may not be considered dishonesty, because sometimes teams just really don't actually have the evidence, but it's valid. But that's something as a judge you should consider, because if they don't present the evidence, then it can't really be held as valid in the round when another team has evidence going directly against it. So that's one thing you really want to consider. But if there's falsifying of evidence, it's most of the time just an automatically disqualification. So that's really what it goes down to in these debates. And one of the biggest things I could stress at the end is that you need to have an open mind towards these. Again, biggest problem judges have is bringing in their own personal bias into these debates with them and bringing in their own ideas. Because some judges may say, well, you won on these points, but I liked theirs better. That's not a point that you want to be able to, that you want to say as a judge when giving a critique. Well, I liked theirs better, but you had better points. So those are things you want to steer away from. As a judge, just to end with, you might want to always give a little bit of feedback on the flow, saying what teams did right, what teams did wrong, maybe some advice. Leave the debaters with some sort of advice. Don't just tell them all teams did great in this debate. Give them something. Tell them, like, you could have done this better, X better. You could have spoke better in the second speech, or spoken this point a little bit better. And those are really what benefits the debaters at the end of the day. And that's really what debate is about for most people. It's bettering them as debaters and as speakers. And that's what you want to leave them with. Just try to leave them with something. So, thanks for watching, and I hope you get a better understanding of how to judge a debate.